3, 2.
Yeah, we're counting. Okay, so now we will call the meeting of the East Bank Committee to order. Do we have any public comment? Going once, going twice? Okay, no public comment. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Mendez from the Mayor's Office for his presentation.
All right, thanks, Chair. Let's see, we have some general updates, and then to talk about the legislation that is pending that you deferred a couple days ago to the May 6th meeting to approve an intergovernmental agreement. The general updates to start, the mayor has appointed the first CEO of the East Bank Development Authority, Ben York, who I think you all know, who's here with us today. And then hand in hand with that, his partner and professional partner, Anna Greider, is the new COO of the East Bank Development Authority. And the mayor's really excited that Ben and Anna have decided to agree to lead the authority. We think that's a great stability for Metro and the authority since they've been the heart and soul of the work on the East Bank for several years now. The second update is about what's called the Public Realm Framework Plan, which was adopted by the Downtown Code Design Review Committee just a couple weeks ago, a week and a half ago. And we can get this document emailed to you guys after the meeting, but it's a 60-page document that goes into great detail showing images what the public space should look like and be framed around on the initial development area on the East Bank. And the idea of getting it approved and adopted by the DRC is that when Fallon brings a particular building or space to the Design Review Committee for approval, there's a standard to be judged against. And I would encourage everybody to take a look at it. It actually looks really awesome. And then the third update is there's going to be a meeting next Thursday about the East Bank Boulevard public engagement. And this is, the requirement here is fairly technical. As you all know, we've been working to build against the Imagine East Bank plan. But in looking forward to hopefully getting federal funding for East Bank Boulevard, assuming there's still public funding for East Bank Boulevard, certain public engagements are required for what's called the NEPA process. And so this meeting will be a 4 to 7 open house at Cross Point Church on the East Bank. There's an online survey that we'll email to this group after this meeting too, that'll be open from the 24th to May 15th, along with 2 pop-up events. And the main goal of this part of the federal funding process is that before final design decisions can be made, public engagement is required. So at that meeting, among other things, it'll show a couple different, I think maybe 4 different iterations of what the East Bank Boulevard could be arranged with. I think going into it, the biggest thing that we're expecting to get comments about is about bike lanes or no bike lanes. If you guys come to the meeting, you'll basically hear that, first of all, for this part of the East Bank, it will end up being the highest density of bike lanes that you can find anywhere in the 500 square miles of this county. Every single road on the East Bank, other than East Bank Boulevard, will have dedicated bike lanes. And for East Bank Boulevard itself, no decisions have been made yet. Part of the process is to get the engagement first. But what part of the presentation will show is that there's a trade-off to be had between width of road, width of sidewalks, and exactly how bikes work in connection with the broader East Bank area. And again, there will be multiple options shown, and we'll be getting public feedback on that at that 4 to 7 on the 24th. I'll pause there before we move on to the intergovernmental agreement to see if there's any questions or comments or thoughts about these updates?
On the East Bank Boulevard, do we have like projections of traffic counts for that?
Yes, and those will be part of the presentation. I don't know those off the top of my head, but it's 70,000 trips per day?
170,000.
Yeah,
Oh, it was close,
for
170,000.
the area, not on the boulevard itself, but for the
For
area.
the whole East Bank.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's detailed breakdown of what that 170 is and where it goes and kind of what the mode split is on all of that. So that's all part of the conversation next Thursday.
So that'll be presented at the meeting and also online for so people can see it that are responding to the survey that will be open.
I believe it all goes online after the meeting, yes.
Okay. And I guess how are we approaching, obviously there will be a facility that has 8 to 20 events a year that will have like an enormous amount of traffic. So how are we balancing, those conditions that are, a very small number of calendar days each year against the livability and accessibility 365 days a year?
Yeah, and again, I'll keep saying, no decision's been made about the boulevard because it's premature. It's part of getting input as we can hear about it. For the roads that, where we don't necessarily have to worry about federal funding, we are clear what we're gonna do on every other road on the East Bank in terms of dedicated bike lanes on every one of those roads. And so if you can imagine downtown, we're nowhere near that. We're bike lanes in current downtown on 2 or 3 streets out of 12. This would be every street with dedicated bike lanes. Also, speeds are going to be, I think 25 miles an hour is the highest speed limit on the East Bank, with some of the roads off the boulevard at 15 and 20, or just 20.
We will follow Metro's current guidelines, and I think 25 is the lowest posted speed we can do, but generally there will be 25-mile-an-hour zones only.
Okay. And then, for getting around, those of us who do get around by bike know that if every cross street and every parallel street's got bike lanes, there's going to be a lot of options. Depending on what the boulevard looks like, we know one thing for sure about the boulevard is that it will contain one of the 3 planned transit stations as part of the transit system that got overwhelming support in the referendum. The 3 will be the current Music City Central, a new one on Lafayette south of the Convention Center, and then the 3rd one is on the East Bank Boulevard at the intersection with James Robertson Parkway. So the one mode that absolutely for sure has to have a substantial priority on this road is buses, because it's going to be part of the circulation of buses around downtown. And so that's a primary issue. And from there, its planning is still in progress. And we're happy to, after we have the public engagement and hear what we hear there, we can come back and do a much longer presentation about the boulevard if you'd like.
Go ahead, say first.
Left to right?
Okay, it's okay.
No, you go. Appreciate the information and updates. Question about the protected bike lanes on the adjacent streets. Is that flex post protected? Is that cement protected? What's the mechanism of protection there?
It's going to be great in the details. I turned Ben York.
It's awesome.
It's very different on different streets, and so different streets have different priority. We're working with the NDOT planning staff on what the best fit for each is. Some are concrete protected, some are curb elevation protected in order to keep the cross-section narrowed and scaled more towards pedestrian. And so we're working through those details, but in general, the work that was done in Imagine East Bank is what we're implementing, and so that's what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Yes, I just had a question regarding how are we informing the public about like the upcoming meetings, and then is there like graphics or things for us to use to share out? Can someone answer that?
It's up on social media for Metro social media now.
Yeah, it was posted with the 30-day notice through all of the traditional means and methods, and then it was up on social media yesterday.
Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday.
Tuesday, it's on Metro's social media. There's a graphic, but I'm happy to send it to you.
Yeah, can you send it
Yeah.
to the committee?
Oh, no, it is on, I saw it on Instagram too, so it's pretty postable.
That's good. I haven't seen it, so that's why I was just asking. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. You all said, but I failed to absorb, that 170,000 number that you mentioned. What does that signify?
It's all trips within the study area. And so within the 550 acres, that's
So,
all trips.
If-
all
if it
550
all built
acres.
out.
If it all built out to the
All
density
built
that's
out.
permitted.
In your estimate, that's daily estimated trips to the whole 500 acres. Okay.
And
To,
not-
through,
yeah.
in, it's all trips.
And that's all modes of trip.
All
All
modes.
modes, yeah, not just
Walking,
cars.
biking, everything, transit
Okay.
trips.
Thank you. I didn't absorb it when you said it.
And it's part of the online survey that will go live after the public meeting. And at the public meeting, we got boards about travel demand and mode split, and all of that information will be digested.
Anybody else have any questions at this point?
All right, intergovernmental agreement. Just to recap, a year ago today, there was not an East Bank Development Authority. The state enabling legislation was about to be passed. During the summer, y'all adopted the state enabling legislation, and through the late fall, the mayor appointed his 5 appointees, and the council appointed their 2 appointees. And so we got to the beginning of 2025, the East Bank Development Authority had a board, but no CEO, no assets, no employees, so still couldn't do anything. We've taken care of the CEO, and we still need to get it something to do. It's an authority with no assets, a bunch of powers, but nothing to execute powers over. So the point of the intergovernmental agreement is to lay out the terms and conditions by which Metro would move assets, employees, and power to from itself to the East Bank Development Authority, and basically be the rules of the road between the two on a go-forward basis. So I'll run through the things on this slide next. As far as assets, there are real estate assets. You all will remember that Metro owns approximately 130 acres on the East Bank. We are not seeking to transfer all of that to the authority. We are seeking to transfer the 30 acres that are subject to the master development agreement that y'all approved a year ago to the East Bank Development Authority. And in addition to those 30 acres, there's a plaza between the new football stadium and the 30 acres that will transfer. And then once the current stadium has been demolished, that site will move in, a rapid succession from the Sports Authority to Metro to the East Bank Development Authority. We are not conveying any other Metro-owned land, and for all of the land being conveyed, Metro retains the right to get the land back if for whatever reason the East Bank Development Authority were to cease to exist. In addition to the real estate, so there's basically 30 acres being conveyed. And it's the initial development area and plaza, which is the stuff that's not grayed out on this slide. In addition to the real estate, and you've seen this slide before, this was attached to the master development agreement approved last year. In addition to the real estate assets, certain contracts are being conveyed to the East Bank Development Authority. It's the master development agreement, so the 99-year development agreement, which will generate some dozen plus buildings and rent for 100 years will be conveyed to the authority to manage and execute. All agreements between Metro, Fallon, and the Titans related to how the parties are going to work together on the East Bank and share space and share parking, those will be conveyed to the authority. And for these 2 bullet points, you should know that the documents that got approved a year ago were written to allow the possibility that Metro could either keep the agreements or assign them to the authority. So we don't need to change last year's agreements to allow for this. And then the third thing is there's pretty substantial work that the East Bank team, led by Ben and Anna, have been working on, and those contracts are for a program management agreement with HDR, a civil engineering contract, and the contract for development of the East Bank Boulevard. Those will be assigned to the authority. In addition to the real estate in the contracts, there's approximately $100 million of available capital spending money that's been approved in prior capital spending plans, entirely for NDOT and planning for because they're the ones that have been incubating the East Bank work before we've had an authority. These previously approved capital spending items will be transferred so that the East Bank Development Authority has the power to deploy those funds. So there's nothing new here. It's all projects that have been previously approved in capital improvement budgets, through capital spending plans, through council legislation. We're just changing who is executing on it from Metro departments over to the authority. And then those are the assets. For employees, we're having current Metro employees when we first wrote this slide, they were current Metro employees, Ben and Anna. Now they're authority employees, and control of their day-to-day activities is being run by the authority rather than Metro. So instead of the directors of planning and NDOT controlling the day-to-day activities of our employees, it's the East Bank Development Authority will dictate their day-to-day activities. The authority will have power to hire new employees and create compensation benefits packages for the new employees. This is very similar or identical to what we've done previously for the Convention Center Authority. Is the best example. Talk a little bit about the powers and authority of the East Bank Development Authority. I would say I'd focus on the guiding principles here. The idea is that key East Bank development policy decisions remain with Metro, and planning, recommending, implementing, executing on tasks related to the policy decisions goes over to the East Bank Development Authority. So there's no ability for the authority to create new debt without council approval. Without the ability to create debt, it can't do any capital spending without a stop through the Metro Council. And as I think you all know from the legislation last year, there's no ability to comment on land use or zoning, and there's no eminent domain powers. We have to describe what the financial terms are between Metro and the East Bank Development Authority. And this is broken into 2 categories. One is at some point when there's multiple high-rises generating rent, the authority will have its own revenue. Until then, it does not have revenue. And so we've got, for now, Metro would invest through its annual operating budget to provide the East Bank Development Authority operating expenses, basically no different than what we're doing now. The operating budget pays for the work the East Bank team has done. And then later, once there's rent revenue coming in, the first thing that happens with the money, the waterfall, is that East Bank Development Authority operating expenses get paid. Secondly, Any revenue beyond that is used to create a reserve for the authority's operating expenses and to repay Metro for whatever it's fronting and operating expenses between now and when rent is coming in. And then anything above that gets paid back to Metro. I'll compare that to, say, the Convention Center Authority. Like, one of the things that we hear about the Convention Center Authority, some people think it's a good idea, some people think it's a bad idea, but the fact is that I think they've got a fund balance of some $500 million at the Convention Center Authority right now. And our intention is that in exchange for Metro transferring 30 acres, $100 million worth of capital spending power, and 100-year agreements for development, there's not going to be a piling up of $500 million at the East Bank Development Authority. We're going to let it cover its expenses, let it build a reserve of 1 year's worth of expenses, and then repay Metro to the general fund. The one caveat I'll add to this is that if in some future year we were all to decide, and it would require council approval, that there would be, say, tax increment financing or a business improvement district on the East Bank, then it would be able to keep money generated through that to spend on capital. But again, the overall ethos is the authority can't be in the business of spending capital money without it taking a stop in the Metro Council first. Length of agreement. You probably know the first bullet point I wrote is intended to last a long time, indefinitely. It's meant to be flexible enough to last decades. It can be amended only by the agreement of both the authority and Metro. It can be terminated by mutual agreement or if there's default. And one of the defaults is that if the percent of control that Metro has over appointing EBDA members goes down for whatever reason. We don't think it can without Metro's approval, but if it goes down, it's an event of default which can cause termination of the agreement, so long as it doesn't impair anybody's contract rights. And then finally, the capitalization of this document is so bizarre.
You're just queuing it up for us.
Questions.
Get in the queue.
Are there any questions?
I have some I suspect other people do, but we'll just go this direction and then come back to mine at the end.
I don't have anything right now.
I'm okay at the moment.
Just one question. One question, but what are the revenue projections over the next couple of years? And that's probably hard to see with all the different variables, but do we have a sense of revenue projections over a certain amount of time for that recapture area? And what happens if it goes up to the point where there's a waterfall and the waterfall comes back down? Does Metro then pay for it again, or how does that work?
Good questions. When y'all passed the agreement a year ago, what we said and thought as far as timing for the first buildings is that, and this is Metro, Fallon's reaction at the time was, like, you got to approve the agreement before we can figure out a timeline. On the mayor's office side, our view is for most large development, if you figure 2 years to plan, 2 years to build, we wouldn't have expected any buildings to be operational in the best case scenario till 2028 is what we said a year ago. Now that we've got a year under our belt, I feel some cautious optimism that 2028, their first couple buildings may be up and going, will be open by that kind of timeline, plus or minus a little bit. That's likely, and again, think about the Gulch. Gulch is, I don't know how many buildings are in the Gulch. This area is about half the size of a Gulch. It'll be a while before there's a lot of buildings built. As far as getting positive revenue that's enough to cover the expenses of the authority and start paying back Metro, I would like to think that 2028 to 2030, it'd start being positive. Hopefully, it's never going to go back to not being positive. One of the wild cards in all this is we're not expecting environmental issues over there because most of the IDA was poked and prodded when the current football stadium was built. But if there were really terrible environmental problems that we ran into, we've got a cost-sharing arrangement on that. We're not expecting that, but things like that make it hard to predict.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Good, that's it, thank you.
I just had a question when you were talking about now that Ben will lead up, and then when you were saying other employees, do y'all have like an idea like what that would look like? Because you were saying based on funding, and then with the HR, are we using, with the EBDA, use Metro HR, or are they gonna have also their own HR? I wasn't here for the Music City,
Yeah,
so I don't
sure.
know the details.
Yeah. So what the part of the legislation enabling the authority is it gives it the flexibility for a variety of services that Metro typically provides, where it can choose to either work within Metro's systems or to do something separate. So like IT is an important one. You know, for the foreseeable future, I would expect the authority to piggyback onto Metro ITS for the sort of boatload of typical HR policies. I'm going to guess that sometime during the summer, the authority will have a resolution saying, we hereby adopt Metro's policies about da-da-da-da-da-da. The authority has the power to go a separate direction on any of those things if the authority members approve it. So one thing that's not unusual is like our sports authority can do procurement separately from Metro procurement. And assuming we can actually transfer assets and authority over to the authority, they'll have to figure out for themselves where they want to piggyback on Metro and where they want to come up with their own thing.
Okay, that's helpful,
Sure.
thank you.
Okay, so I just have a couple questions, and I'll begin by saying that some of these questions are me thinking through a universe where, you know, the folks in this room are not necessarily involved with these agreements and entities that we're establishing, so it's not to cast suspicion on anyone or anyone's motivations or anything. But looking at some of the kind of, I guess, incentive structures that we're putting in here, like an entity who is directing excess revenue to another entity, what incentive does that entity have to maximize revenue? My thinking there is just like, where is the, knowing that the kind of third bucket that everything flows into is Metro's general fund, like where is the incentive for this newly created authority to maximize its returns to Metro?
That's a legit concern, and from my perspective, I think there's a different protection for revenue and expenses, certainly capital expenses. On the revenue side, part of this whole Metro decides policy and authority implements is the terms of the leases for the 30 acres. Well, that's been decided. Y'all voted on it. That's set up to be mechanical from here on out. So, you know, I would think that, and there's an audit requirement to make sure, so an audit report would show if the authority 12 years from now is blowing off leases and forgiving rent. The audit would show that. So on the revenue side, I think it's relatively protected. On the capital expense side, as we were talking about, they can't set up a capital spending program without the council weighing in on it. Arguably, operating expenses is a place where there's maybe less protection. presumably audit would provide some protection there. That's my thinking.
And that was just thinking through how other major agreements, like we have one that, Metro as the landlord's responsible for capital and the tenant was responsible for maintenance, and that may have incentivized allowing maintenance issues to progress into capital issues, to move them to our side of the ledger. And I wonder, again, I'm not saying that I think this is happening or that it will happen, but how do we avoid, I know the audit is the mechanism, but like inflation of operating expenses. I don't know what's appropriate. I've never followed closely the financial goings-on of an entity like this, so I don't know what's appropriate, but just like, where are the checks? The audit, obviously, but like, I'm just wondering, is there anything in the agreement that addresses that, or like, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, and this is the operating expenses today versus 5 years versus 50 years from now. It's hard to be really precise about that. Trying to figure out whether Tom Cross has a better answer as far as
The board members have a fiduciary obligation to keep a check on that. And so some of the control is through the appointment of members of that board. Is it expressed that, you get to, the Metro Council gets to review their operating budget? No. But there are controls in place, just as there are for any of our authority boards. I don't know if that was better than your answer or not.
well, I think I think that's fair, and I think if we look back at the last term, started with the then mayor feeling like the Convention Center Authority should chip in more to Metro, and I think that mayor effectively used appointments to cause that to happen. So I think that's a good comment.
Okay, well, thank you. That's all I've got.
For sure.
Yeah, and having served on a board that has done a remittance to the Metro General Fund, it is not uncommon for a mayor to directly ask for it. Just have that. I have a few questions.
Sure.
It's with the same caveat that my colleague has said, right? Which is that I'm assuming none of us in this room are having the conversation when these things come up. So you mentioned the audit requirement, which I appreciate that being in there. And maybe I missed it, I didn't see a deadline for the audit to be provided. And I get a little concerned when I don't see deadlines, because then there's no mechanism to compel it. And so I didn't know if we had considered, I know audits take forever, right? I do know that, but I think a deadline, a very reasonable long one, because they do take forever, would be nice to have in there. And then sort of the flip of that is in the default section. It sort of looks like we kind of have to jump straight to suing each other, but it's always nice to be able to send a letter first and to cure a default before we have to sue each other. So if, say, we don't get an audit, we can send a letter as Metro, or if Metro doesn't provide operating expenses or IT support, I see that our COO is using a nice Metro computer, which I can tell from the little sticker on the back, right? If she doesn't get IT to fix her computer the way she needs to, she doesn't have to sue us. She can just send a nicely worded letter of default first.
So
Is that possible?
I'm going to be like just really direct about the how that works. The law department has let me know that there's not lawsuits between Metro and its authorities like that. They always get resolved because it's all in the Metro family. We had somebody outside who suggested we stick in the dispute resolution section. And I think the law department and I would be just as happy to have absolutely no dispute resolution section, because when Metro gets sideways with its authorities, like, we're not going to a courtroom to have Metro on Metro violence in a courtroom. And so that's the honest feeling about how we feel about it, because there's no known examples of it. But if we, and so we already feel, I mean, I'm airing some stuff, we already feel like we're like tweaking language that we just never wanted in the thing in the first place. And so if we make tweaks to tweaks, I will look at it, but I just soon delete the provision entirely. But your suggestion is great.
And there's a lot happening in the world that I didn't think would ever happen. I guess I would just throw that out there.
What exactly are?
But the deadline on
Some examples.
the deadline on the audit I think would be nice, just that there's
Yeah.
an expectation of when for everybody when it's generally done
gotcha.
and when to expect it.
Yep.
And I guess my other question is when we talk about capital expenses versus the operating expenses, I mean that's something in Metro we have a lot of conversations around, right? Like we don't always agree on what is an operating expense versus what is a capital expense. Have there been conversations, and this is just more theoretical, about are we going to use general accounting standards? Are we going to sort of follow the Metro standards, which frankly aren't always general accounting standards? Like what is the East Bank sort of contemplating is an operating expense versus what is a capital expense?
Well, we get pretty clear advice from our bond counsel about there's no dispute about what a capital expense is. If we're using GO bonds for it,
Okay.
then it is clear what it is. And so that's our intent is to, bond counsel has told us what's a capital expense and what's not. And I forget the formal definition, but it basically comes down to whether it's able to be capitalized and depreciated or not, is the thumbnail sketch of it. And so, yeah, operating expenses are intended to be paying for people pencils and coffee, for example. Elise.
Only.
I think that's all I have.
All right.
Ju- yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you think about future Metro-owned land being potentially eventually conveyed to the East Bank Authority? I mean, I understand that Metro retains everything with respect to it, but are there provisions that you propose that those would be just incorporated into the existing contract, or codicils to the contract for each new piece, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, subject to, the caveat that we're most likely talking about something that is not during the current council term, mayoral term. The way I've personally envisioned it is at some point in time, there will be some number of buildings that are out of the ground or getting toward finished, and the Titan Stadium new one will be clearly finished or getting close to finished, and there will be a subjective conclusion that, wow, like, it's looking great over there, time to start thinking about the next 30 acres, 40 acres, 50 acres. And we know from last time around, it was a couple-year turnaround time to actually get a developer to pull the trigger. And so the hope is that we have enough visibility into a couple of years from now. It'd be great to make sure there's not a gap between the development that Fallon's doing and whatever happens next, whether it's Fallon or somebody else, and that we would start the process. And I'm assuming we'll collectively want to RFP it. If Fallon's doing a good job, I'm sure they're going to be able to be, competitive, is what I imagine, but who knows? Then a new master development agreement will be negotiated, and my assumption is that if that's 3 or 4 years into the authority being in existence, and people are generally happy with the authority, then part of that development agreement would be an amendment to this thing, this intergovernmental agreement to transfer that land also. That's the maybe most probable way I've imagined it happening.
That's what it looked like to me. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something in this document that would structure future discussions of that nature. But I mean, in other words, we just start from scratch. Metro owns the land. We proceed if we want to.
Part of trying to make this be flexible enough to last for a long time is to basically say we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Well, I think I favor that approach. I think if we want to add an amendment for new land, we can. But I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything about how this might structure those downstream decisions.
Y'all can tell me, but my sense of the conversations this committee had a year ago is that was a majority or unanimous preference to do it that way, was my take at the time.
Speaking only for myself, I'm comfortable with that.
I'll second that.
My hope is in 3 or 4 years, this is going so well that we are the ones beating down your door saying, hey, we'd love to release the next block of acres so that we can start that RFP process, so that we can start getting in the weeds with this group on figuring out how to move the next step forward.
Does the Sports Authority own any bits and pieces of this anymore, or is Metro has all of it?
Y'all know that the current football stadium is still operational, and that agreement is between the Titans entity and the Sports Authority. So the Sports Authority and some of the parking lots that are closest to the stadium are currently leased from Metro to the Sports Authority to a Titans entity. And once under the deal approved in 2023, 2 years ago, once the new stadium is built and the current one is demoed, then that Sports Authority interest automatically transfers to Metro.
But there formerly had been, Sports Authority had ground leases on some stuff over there, right? But not anymore.
Right, part of the deal 2 years ago is much of the Sports Authority land was transferred to Metro 2 years ago.
Chair, I have a couple of questions not related to the IDA, but happy to wrap that up.
All right. Do you have any more on your presentation?
Nope.
Okay, all right.
The that document that came out about the public space, from the downtown design entity, is there anything in there about undergrounding utilities, or is that something that the East Bank Authority would be interested in enforcing ongoingly?
There's nothing prescriptive in that document. However, as an entity, we are pushing hard with our partners at NES and with all of the comms professionals to underground everything. We're actively undergoing a project to start work on undergrounding Interstate Drive. We're actively looking at undergrounding Shelby. So we're really trying to get into the weeds on some of that. But yes, it's not prescriptive anywhere, but it is a goal of the East Bank.
Is there anything you need from us in order to help that happen?
Do you want the real answer?
Mm-hmm.
It's funding.
Okay.
It's expensive. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's funding and getting the dollars in hand that we can go into that. And so while there is a massive transfer of funds in the IGA, large lion's share of that is for right-of-way acquisition north of James Robertson. And so funding of putting in that infrastructure. NES has been a great partner thus far, but being able to go to those people and say we're ready to go is what we need to be able to do.
I have one more question, Chair, unrelated. Ms. Rennes, do you have any updates on the status of discussions with TPAC?
Discussions are ongoing. The mayor is looking forward to having TPAC on the East Bank. We're not ready to announce anything more than that.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up on the utility question. Is there thinking about what network infrastructure is going to look like throughout this site? I mean, we know that we have at least one major tech tenant that will be on the East Bank. I imagine there's going to be an enormous demand for network connectivity, and so when you're looking at kind of the utility plan and the undergrounding, I mean, is there space to build a big public fiber network and lease it out to tenants of the area? Is there space to at least not have different people's fiber lines going in willy-nilly, haphazard, micro-trenching where bicyclists are supposed to ride? Like, at least putting in some kind of conduit that can be leased out to.
So there's a
network.
very definitive utility plan on the Metro-owned land, because we have complete autonomy and control over that land. I would say we've done a really good job of planning that. And to answer your question, is everywhere there's an NES duct bank, there's an ITS duct bank.
Okay.
That is paralleling it either below or beside, in a fashion that Metro would control the ability to control what goes in and what does not go in. The hope is that everybody goes in and that we're not having the kind of spaghetti network of micro-trenching and things of that nature.
I don't know, I mean, does it work for these utility providers? I mean, like, we've got, I can point you to spots in my area where Google has micro-trenched, Verizon has micro-trenched to a 5G access point. Like, it's just a complete mess. And then when we go in and do any further utility work, it's, you know, you got to deal with now Piedmont and NES and Verizon and Google, and it's, so do those firms that need lots of bandwidth, like, can they just, like, if we built a network out, could they just use the network itself instead of running their own fiber lines, or do they generally need their own fiber lines? That's kind of not within the scope of what anybody came here to talk about today, but I'm just.
That's a big question.
You're kind of in the weeds on that. I would kind of rely on legal representation on that a little bit, because there's a trigger in there as to what we can require and what we can't require. We can provide the conduit space, we can provide the ability to have reliability and location.
We can't make them use our system.
Correct.
So we are providing, as Ben said, we're trying to make sure that there are duct banks in place and trying to encourage them to all underground their stuff. We're not, at this point, I don't think we're talking about having a Metro-owned system that other people would connect to, and we couldn't make them use it if they didn't want to.
Metro will have their own interconnected network for the smart signals and all of the things that IT would want and PD would want and things of that nature, but we would not have a dedicated network that anybody can go in and piggyback on.
And I'm going to take, if you don't mind, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that Mr. Cross is here. Are we allowed to run municipal commercial networks? Like, can we sell access to internet as a city?
I think Chattanooga has some version of that, and I think that has been controversial, and I'm not sure whether we can or not. I'll find the answer and get it to you, but I think the legislature took sort of a dim view of that based on lobbying from some of the competing providers. And historically, Metro has not done things like that, where we're seen as competing with private businesses that also offer that service. That's sort of a policy question, but I'll try to get you an answer on the legal one.
My sense was that it was not eclipsed, but it looked to be heading in that direction if any other cities decided to do so. But I wonder if that conversation has shifted now that we have all these different entities wanting to dig and run their own fiber, and it's again, this situation where we've got Verizon and Google and whatever else in one area. Maybe we can talk about that another time. I don't want to take up everybody's time with this fiber stuff here today.
No, but I think your point is well taken. It's those of us who ride our bikes or walk around the city a lot, it is a mess, and I would hate for us to all spend a lot of money on really pretty new streets and really pretty new bike lanes and sidewalks and walkways, just for them to be overtaken by yet another series of what I call like spider webs, because they kind of look like little spider webs, like everywhere.
I think we're, correct me if this is over optimistic. I think on the Metro-owned land, I think we're reasonably optimistic that we can get it all underground in a way that
We've
makes
been
sense.
having utility coordination meetings with all of the major providers, and they all have been receptive to the conversation. Nobody has inked anything, nobody's said, sign us up, but everybody has understood that we're trying to provide space, We're trying to provide reliability. So nobody's said anything negative, and our partners have been great thus far.
And we've also been working with different folks in Metro Legal on agreements that we would have with the comms providers for them to use Metro ITS conduits and stuff. I think we're down to like discussing the rates that would go into those
Okay.
agreements.
Yeah.
So we're pretty far down the road now. Nobody's signed anything yet, but we have been working with Metro Legal and the comms providers on an agreement that would satisfy them to use what we're building in the central waterfront.
And I would just add to that, getting outside the metro-owned land on the East Bank, you pretty quickly get into a trade-off of the more we want to spend to build all the roads in advance, the more we could have the same degree of confidence. The less we want to do that, the less confidence we have.
Well, I guess the reason whenever I'm talking with folks about this, I steer it back to, selling access to either networks or conduit is a potential revenue source to fund that additional work. And then, moving that model outside of the East Bank as well. We just dug up Main Street. We're digging up every street in McFerrin Park right now for water infrastructure. And it would be expensive, it would not be easy, but we could put conduit there for fiber. I don't think it's something that I would like to see us be like a little bit more aggressive on. And the East Bank, I think, is a really good opportunity to kind of pilot in the private areas some of that coordination with property owners and utility companies, I think.
Okay.
While we're on comms and we're just going down this rabbit hole, I think a frequent complaint we all get is that cell phone service is real shoddy. Are we talking to the comms providers as well about wireless, like the little mini spots they put up around?
There we go again. We're in a place where we can we can provide location, we can provide regulation.
Are we looking at locations for
Yes,
them?
we're trying to co-locate cell service on poles so that we don't end up with a myriad of poles. So co-locating their stacks on top of our light poles or our signal poles, things of that nature. They don't like to co-locate on the same pole. And so we're just trying to, we're early on that, but we're trying the best we can to guide that conversation as it comes in.
Well, thank you.
Is that a technical issue with having two transmitters on one pole, or is that we don't want your stuff near our stuff?
I think the practical experience is that if provider A goes out to a shared facility, that provider A's folks aren't always perceived as being careful with provider B and provider C's stuff, and that's what they don't like.
Okay.
Anybody else? We don't have to take a vote because we are not a voting committee. So these will be up before budget.
Right.
Budget
And planning and zoning.
planning and zoning.
And the East Bank Development Authority has a meeting next Tuesday. They've had a discussion at their March meeting about this. We made a couple of changes based on their comments that are reflected in what got filed with y'all. You've got a comment that I'll talk to everybody about. And anyway, the East Bank Development Authority meets next Tuesday. And so y'all know when it gets to you on May 6th what they did with it.
And then I guess we can all follow up later about sort of the next steps and the next time that it makes sense to meet after that.
I have one question or suggestion for the committee. I don't know when the last time we updated our council committee website is, but today?
Well, this presentation is up.
Oh, great. Well, that's what I was going to ask is, can we get this presentation, the public realm document, and the intergovernmental agreement? Are those?
We can, the intergovernmental agreement is on Legistar at this point, but once we pass it, I think we can put it up. And then as far as the realm document,
it's on the planning department's website, but I can share the link.
I do like, that was kind of the hope of the thing, was to have one
Yeah.
bucket that people could go to and find basically everything relevant to what's happening in all the different places. So that'd be awesome if we could get that.
And just as a small favor, will you guys give us a chance to figure out what's up with the capitalization of this document before?
You don't like it?
We can swap it out. It's character.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
Put them in all caps.
it's on every slide
That's psychology.
too.
Well, at the beginning, when ad hoc wasn't capitalized,
I know,
I was
I
like, is
totally
that a stylistic choice?
I was
Metro to
wondering.
lowercase.
I was wondering.
Can we change Metro to lowercase m in all future stylizations?
Motion to adjourn.
Rebrand.
Rebrand. We are now Metro.
Did it really drive you insane?
It did drive me
Yeah.
crazy.
Alright, if nobody has anything further, we will adjourn.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.
Just in the meeting.
And then revisit on,
Yeah.
that was a super cool walk-in
Oh, they-
site
So
with
good, yeah.
HDR
Dark.
folks and Seth.
You got it?
No.
It was, there's a clearer path than I remembered from my walk with Sam years ago. So
Which side?
to the right of the which
We're just like, okay.
everything to the left would require
So the audio is still on.
not
Yeah.